Good evening. I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. The American economy, it is a puzzle to senior economists, to those who are paid to watch and comment on the American economy. Yes, it is possible to say recovery is here. No one will argue with that. However, it's not articulate, is it? And recovery is what you feel, not what Washington or economists in the academy tell you. Recovery means that you are growing, your prospects are good, your jobs are good, the jobs are good for your children. Also, at the same time, recovery means that you hear on the television about new industry, about new innovation. Sometimes we can find that. That's the glass half full. Steve Moore, the chief economist at the Heritage Foundation, is here joining me tonight to comment about the American economy and why there are these shadows around the glass half full. Steve, a very good evening to you. I don't want to prejudice this with metaphors, and I just did with the word shadow. However, because you comment and write about this all the time at the Heritage Foundation, you know your colleague, my friend and colleague and co-host Larry Kudlow comments about this all the time. We want to say that recovery is here, but there are these hesitations, and one came up in the jobs report last week that looked very good. We have jobs growth. But the hesitation was wage growth. What does that mean? Why does that worry economists such as yourself? Good evening to you, Steve.
Hi, John. Well, it is a schizophrenic economy right now. You know, there's some things in the economy that look so good and other things that look so lousy, and I think people are trying to sort this out right now. You hit upon the big negative in the economy in your final statement there, which is that wages continue to fall and they're not keeping pace with inflation. And this is what Ronald Reagan used to call real take-home pay, and it's just not keeping up with where Americans would expect it to be. And if you look at attitudes of Americans right now, John, they are very pessimistic. Only less than 40% of Americans think that the American dream will be there for their children, that their children will live better than they do it. So that's the negative about the economy. But I got to be honest, there are a lot of, and by the way, you're also right that things like Obamacare are a big problem too. But do you want me to talk a little bit about the positive?
No, I want to stay with the wages because I want you to explain why it is you watch them so carefully, why we comment, because after all, there are more than 200,000 jobs added, and we've had big recoveries in 14. It was delayed 6 years. However, we have a recovery right now, but wages bother you. Is this part of the middle class story?
It is. It's the middle class squeeze that's going on right now. And by the way, it's one reason that, you know, when President Obama is going to give his big speech on Tuesday on the State of the Union, and he's going to probably take a victory lap and say how wonderful things are.
Good for him. Good.
Yeah, right,
yes,
exactly.
Okay, fine.
And a lot of Americans are going to say, wait a minute, what is he talking about? My living standard, look, if your wage doesn't rise, then your living standard doesn't rise. It's that simple. And that's a real problem for the American people, and they deserve a pay raise. And you got to have more jobs, you got to have more productivity, you have to have more businesses if you're going to get that pay raise. And that's the reason why there's so much economic anxiety out there right now.
The deflation story. We hear it in Europe, but that's a very small part of our trade. I understand that deflation can be attacked by the central bankers there. Good luck to them. But is deflation part of a concern here? And does that explain wages? I don't understand how they all fit together, but whenever I bring up the word deflation, very well-educated senior economists such as yourself take it seriously. Why?
So the last 5 or 6 years, inflation has been running at roughly 2%, which is a very low rate of inflation. Just so your listeners know, deflation means negative price increases where prices are actually falling. And, we haven't had that, I don't think, in the U.S. economy since the Great Depression. Right. So that's why people get nervous about this. When I was talking about wages, just to be very clear about this, John, I was talking about relative to inflation. So, inflation's been running at about 2% per year for the last 5 or 6 years. Wages have been only growing at about 1.5% per year. That means they're not keeping up. Now, there is a silver lining here. The decrease in gas prices, which is huge, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago, and it's just since the last time I was on, the prices have fallen again.
And $35 is imaginable. That's how incredibly low it is. Yes.
And that means, if we get $35 a barrel, to translate into that what people care about, which is what they pay at the pump, you're talking about $1.69. And it's been a long time. So that's been a big break for consumers. And I got to get this off my chest. These people who say, these low gas gas price and low oil prices are a curse. I don't see that. I see it good for consumers, good for producers, good for just about everybody except people in the oil patch.
We move now to other concerns in the economy. In speaking with my colleague Gene Marks about small businesses, he writes of it for the Washington Post. Small businesses can celebrate. There are positives. There's good confidence in the American consumer. That's good for small businesses. However, there are metrics in the Obamacare that worry all of them, and they're adjusting. One is if you have 50 employees. Another is there's 30 hours a week. What I'm told is that they're sensible businessmen, and they're reducing people under 30 hours. Why is that happening?
So these are two new terms in the lexicon of economics and business. One is a 49er, and I'm not talking about the San Francisco 49ers. A 49er is a business that has capped its employment, John, at 49 workers. And I talked to a lot of employers who say, I will be damned if I hire a 50th worker. And the reason they say that is they don't want to have to comply with all of these new regulations that Obamacare...
Which kick in at 50.
At 50, exactly.
Right.
Now, the other statistic that you mentioned is 30 hours a week. The other term I'll give you is a 29er. And a 29er is a company that only hires workers for 29 hours a week or less. And the reason they do that, again, is to get around Obamacare. And if we look at the statistics in the labor force data, it's showing that we're becoming a bit of a part-time nation where it's, you can get a job out there, but it only pays 8 hours a week. By the way, if you're trying to raise a family, good luck raising a family on a job with 28 hours a week, not 40 hours a week.
And that is a direct consequence of the way the law was written.
That's right.
And we don't have reasoning from the administration why they're holding to this.
By the way, let me just interrupt you for a second, John.
Right.
Since when is 30 hours a week a full-time job?
It's not.
It's not.
No, these things are not rational. I'm just trying to submit
they're arbitrary.
These numbers are thrown around. The Congress right now, and we'll turn to politics in the second segment, but I want to mention, they're talking about a 40-hour week, adjusting the Affordable Care Act. Would that make a big distinction?
Yes, it would help. It would help because then people, instead of getting a 28 hours a week job, they'd be able to get 35, 36, 40 hours a week.
Which is a full work week.
Exactly. So that would be a very positive
without mandates.
Exactly.
Of the Affordable Care Act.
And look, the problem is if you're a small businessman or woman and you've got 47 workers and you want to hire 5 more, you fall off this cliff because not only are the extra workers now applicable to Obamacare, but every worker is. So the marginal cost, as we say as economists, of hiring that additional worker goes way, way through the roof. And can you think of a worse time when we still have 12 million people unemployed in this country or underemployed, where we actually have passed a law that discourages employers from hiring workers?
I have a separate matter over here. I don't know if it relates, so I'm not going to say it's all of a piece. Larry and I, and you have spoken with us in the past, and recently Larry and I spoke to another colleague about transfer payments being a possible explanation for the sluggish recovery and for the dissatisfaction of the American workforce. As I understand it, the generosity and low standards of the federal government have moved an enormous number of people onto SNAP. That's food stamps.
Right.
At the same time, there have been an acceleration of people retiring so-called disability under Social Security and those extended periods of unemployment that were in 2009 through 2012. Are they a possible explanation for the wage sluggishness and for the slow recovery?
I think they are an explanation, John, for the reduction in the labor force participation rate, the number of Americans who are actually looking for a job. And, excuse me, this is the other kind of cancer on the cell on the economy right now. Number one was the wages we talked about. Number two, Americans of working age, between the ages of 20 and 65, are dropping out of the workforce. And this is the first time, I've looked at this data for a long time, this is the first time we've ever seen a recovery where people dropped out of the workforce. Usually people enter the workforce when there are more jobs.
And this is a product of policy from the Obama administration.
I believe it is. So you have had, very generous welfare benefits, food stamps. Now, unemployment insurance, we're finally cutting back on that. Right. And by the way, as we've cut back on long-term unemployment benefits, guess what? The unemployment rate has come down. That's a good thing.
Steve Moore from Heritage. We're discussing the big economy, but when we come back, we'll be focused on the Congress. Remember, the 114th Congress is all new because it's in the to control the Republican Party and its leadership, but it must work with the president. That's the nature of the Constitution. The first and second articles work together. And so immediately is the Keystone XL pipeline and other matters, a great concern of tax reform, we'll discuss when we come back. I'm John Batchelor with Steve Moore. This is The John Batchelor Show.